Yokoso owashitare. Welcome back, and before we begin, I have a request to make of you guys. I will be coming up on my anniversary of starting this whole little YouTube project of mine in about a month. Currently we're sitting at a little over 800 subscribers, and although I am super grateful for the support and the fact that we have been able to get 800 within a year, that is amazing. I'm hoping, and this is just a personal request of mine, that maybe we could make it to 1,000 before the year is up. So I think somewhere around August 22nd or something was when my first video went up. If we can get to 1,000 before that same time this year, I will be so happy and it would be amazing. So please, if you like this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel too if you haven't already, and please share it with your friends. Go find all your weeb friends, go find your history nerd friends, go find your folktale storytelling friends, share it with them, get the word out, and hopefully we can get to 1,000 before the 1 year mark, which would be amazing. But that's my one request. And with that being said, we're gonna just move on to today's story because it's a little bit of a long one. So let's get into it. Once upon a time, ima wa mukashi, there was a man by the name of Taira no Kanetada, who had just been appointed the governor of the province of Kazusa, which was out in the eastern provinces. Now this Kanetada was the son of the younger brother of Taira no Sadamori. So if you remember Sadamori, cousin Sadamori from the stories about the rebellion of Taira no Masakado, he was Taira no Masakado's cousin. So this guy was a member of the same family as Taira no Masakado. He was the son of Sadamori's younger brother, because the story has to let us know what his lineage is and so on and so forth, because it's ancient Japan. But the name you need to remember is Taira no Kanetada. But at the time he was appointed governor of Kazusa, he too had a son. Now his son was a full-grown man and was given the title of Yogo Shogun. I honestly don't know exactly what that means. I think it was a little bit of a nickname or a joke title. I don't think he held any actual military power other than the fact that he was a member of the Taira clan, which meant that he was a member of the burgeoning warrior aristocracy. The son, Koremochi, at the time lived in Michinokuni, which was also east, but like northeast. It was way far up there. So you have the capital in the center of the country, and then out east you have the eastern provinces, which is where most of the warriors lived and was considered kind of backwards, backcountry, wild area. And then you had north of there up into the Tohoku region, which was really considered wild and backcountry, and only the fiercest men could make it there. But Taira no Koremochi, the son Koremochi, was living up in Michinoku, up in the Tohoku area, in the frontier land, essentially is what it was. And at the time, Koremochi had just heard that his father was now appointed as governor of Kazusa and was going to be a lot closer to him now. And he was excited about this, because Koremochi hadn't seen his dad in so long, and this was a perfect opportunity to go reconnect with his dad, share in some good times, and just spend some time together. You know, some good father-son bonding, because they hadn't seen each other in so long. And so he sent a letter to his dad, explaining that he was on his way, and his dad was thrilled. This was great. He was going to get to see his son again that he hadn't seen in so long of a time, and they really needed to catch up. This was great. And while Kanetada was waiting with bated breath for his son to arrive ever since he received this letter, it didn't actually take too awfully long before Koremochi did show up. There was a slight problem, however. Right as Koremochi arrived, Papa Kanetada caught a cold, and he wasn't quite well enough to receive his son in the way that he was supposed to, and instead of coming out to meet him, he stayed inside behind a set of blinds, behind a set of curtains. You know, just to kind of keep some space between them, because he didn't want to pass his cold on to his son. Now, one of the things that Papa Kanetada had going on is that inside the blinds, he had a kozamurai, or a young samurai, a young servant who he let in the blinds with him, and specifically, this servant was his masseuse. He was in charge of literally smacking his lower back. I'm assuming it's something like if you've seen people massage, how they'll do like the ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba, kind of that kind of a thing, is what I think it is. And it was precisely at the time that Papa Kanetada was getting a massage that Koremochi arrived. And Koremochi came up, and instead of going inside the blinds to see his father, he was out in the alleyway just beyond the blinds, and he was sitting there, and he and his father talked through these blinds about all sorts of things, how things were going on, what was going on in their respective provinces, just general chit-chat. And Koremochi, being a warrior, didn't arrive alone. He of course had an entire retinue of other warriors. Stalwart warriors, strong warriors, very, very skilled, very, very good at their jobs. And these warriors didn't come up into the aisle with Koremochi, all sat out in the garden in a line, patiently waiting for Koremochi to be done talking to his dad. Standing by at the ready, just in case he needed them for something. They weren't really concerned that anything was going to happen, but they're just there because that's what you do. This is your job. Now, one of these retainers of Koremochi was a man by the name of Tarosuke. And Tarosuke was about 50 so odd years, maybe early 50s, but he was a fully adult man. And not only that, but he was big. He wasn't just tall, but he was sturdy too. Specifically, the term that they use is okini futorite, which is like big and plump. But basically, you can think of this guy as kind of looking like those big strong men. Like if you look at bodybuilders, right? Yeah, they've got some crazy good looking muscles. But if you look at the strong men, the guys who are like really just ridiculously strong, they're not like shredded and cut like those guys are. So this Tarosuke was more like the strong men guys. He was huge, massive, sturdy mountain of a man. And not only that, but he had this fierce looking long beard, and his eyes had a piercing light in them. If we're being honest, he was a little bit scary to be around because he was just kind of like the spitting image of a fierce, terrifying warrior. There were few warriors that could ever compare to this man. Like he was just, you just looked at him and you go, oh shit, I don't want to mess with him, no sir. However, as these men were lined up in the garden, old Papa Kanetada from inside the blinds looked out and he saw this Tarosuke. And as he saw Tarosuke, he spoke to his masseuse, the kozamurai, the young samurai that was giving him a massage, and he asked him, do you see that man over there? That really freaky looking one? Do you know who he is? And his servant replied, no, I do not. And when he said this, Papa Kanetada told his masseuse, that man is the man who killed your father last year. At the time, you were actually still pretty young though, so I'm not surprised you don't know who he is. I just figured I'd let you know. As soon as he heard this, the masseuse stopped, and he had to do a double take. And he told Papa Kanetada, I knew that my father had been killed by another man, but I had no idea who he was. But now I do. Thank you, sir. And with that, Papa Kanetada saw that tears started welling up in his eyes, and he immediately excused himself. Because obviously he had just met his father's murderer, so he had some emotional things to work through. No kidding. But after the masseuse left, Papa Kanetada and son Koremochi continued chatting, and they had some food brought to them, and they ended up eating dinner together, and they fed the men, and everybody was just chatting and having a good time, and eventually it started to get late. And when the sun had gone down, Koremochi got up, and he went off to a place that was a little bit removed from this main area of the house, to where he was going to stay. And his retainers saw him there. They followed him, they made sure that he got there safely. Not that they were worried that anything was going to happen to them again. I mean, it was a pretty safe place, but it's just, this is your job. You accompany your lord where he needs to go. And so they saw their lord off to his quarters, and then they went to where they were going to stay. But these guys wanted to party a little bit. So they had some more food, some more drinks brought to them, and they all hung out, and they laughed, and they talked, and they joked, they ate, and they drank, and they just had some fun for a few more hours into the night. They were on vacation after all. Like, this was great. They got to be away from their regular duties, be in this new place, in this nice house. They were gonna have a good time. Now, at the time, it was the 9th month, which is fairly late in the year, so it got dark fairly early at the time. But the nice thing was that because this was such a nice house, there were torches all over the garden, all over the house, so you could make your way around pretty easily. It wasn't super, super dark, and if any of you guys have been out camping, out in the mountains or out in the middle of nowhere, at night it gets really dark when there's no lights. But again, this house was very well lit, so they felt safe. It was great. They could just continue partying and enjoying themselves, and if they needed to go anywhere, no problems. But of course, everybody has their limit, And old Tarosuke in particular, being probably a little bit older than the rest of them, decided that he was going to retire first. And so he got up, he went to where he was going to go sleep, he did up his pillow, he took off his armor, he placed his sword above his pillow, and he placed his armor, his helmet, and his bow to the side of where he was sleeping, and he fell asleep super fast and super hard. Partly because there were guards all over, men he trusted, men he knew, that were patrolling the whole area all night long. He was not worried about that. There were plenty of torches that in case anything did happen, he would be able to see. And the place he was sleeping was surrounded by 2 thick curtains. So that, let's say there was even a sniper in the area who wanted to shoot an arrow at him, there was no way an arrow was going to make it through these 2 curtains. So he was completely safe. And to top it all off, they had been traveling all day, so he was understandably tired, and he had been partying and drinking, and he was just in a complete state of bliss. So when he fell asleep, he fell asleep. But now we have to take the story and roll it back a little bit, and catch up with that Masseuse, that Kozamurai, who was running around doing who knows what. Because again, immediately after hearing that this Tarosuke was his father's murderer, he got up, and with tears streaming down his eyes, he immediately left. And old Papa Kanetada, again, just thought, well, obviously he's gonna have to deal with some stuff, this is quite the shock, I don't blame him. But he didn't think anything of it. You know, this was just a young servant, he's not a warrior, he's not gonna do anything. But instead of going to a room that was somewhat removed where he could just have a nice cry to himself, he instead went to the kitchen, or the place where they prepared food, and he got a knife. And he took it over to a whetstone, and he sharpened it, and sharpened it, and sharpened it. Sharpened it like crazy. And then he put it in his futokoro, which is like, it's hard to explain, but if you have a kimono or Japanese clothing, you know, you've got those big long sleeves. They didn't have pockets per se. But what you could do is you could stick it in your sleeve, and that's how you would carry things around. But he took this knife, he hid it on his person, and then when things got dark and Koremochi had retired and all of the retainers of Koremochi were partying, he went to where those warriors were. He went to where he knew Tarosuke was going to be sleeping. And amidst the commotion of everybody running around, making sure that these men were served their food and their drinks, and just generally making sure that everything was being presented to them well, because, you know, they wanted to be good hosts. Amidst the commotion of all of this Masseuse managed to pick up a tray himself and feign bringing food to them himself as well so he could get in close. And when he had an opportunity, he managed to slip in to where Tarosuke was going to sleep, and he hid in a little space between those curtains that surrounded his bed and the wall. And he began thinking to himself, "It is said that avenging one's father is permitted by heaven. So please, whatever heavenly powers that there may be, help me to fulfill my filial obligations and take revenge precisely as I intend to do." And then he crouched down so nobody could see him, and he waited. He simply waited until the night drew really, really old, and Tarosuke eventually came to go to sleep. And when Tarosuke had entered, taken off his armor, removed his sword, removed his bow and arrow, and had fallen asleep, this Masseuse knew. And in the darkness, with nobody around, he slipped past the double curtains, went over to Tarosuke, and took that sharpened knife and ran it right across Tarosuke's throat. And in one quick move, after taking care of business there, he immediately darted out from behind the curtains and out into the darkness and wherever else into the house. He was gone. And then dawn came, and time passed, and time passed, and some time passed. And everybody started wondering, where the heck was Tarosuke? Like, he normally doesn't sleep in this late. What's going on? And when breakfast time came around, they were really wondering, like, bro, what the heck happened to Tarosuke? Maybe he's hungover, or maybe he just had too much to drink, I don't know. But one of these retainers said, you know what, I'll go get him, I'll let him know that food's coming up, and I'll wake him up. And so he went over to tell Tarosuke the news. And he went into the room, he pulled back the curtains, and he did not see a hungover Tarosuke. He instead saw Tarosuke covered in blood, and clearly not alive anymore. And as soon as he saw this, he immediately screamed something to the effect of, "What the heck is this?" And he yelled it so loudly that the other retainers in the vicinity instantly knew that something was up, and they came running in. some with their swords drawn, some with their bows and arrows drawn, and they were ready for a fight because obviously something had happened. This was not a normal thing, and these were men of action. They didn't need to be told twice that something bad had gone down. They just knew, and they were ready for a fight. But there was no enemy. There was no fight to be had. So once they realized this, they began asking themselves, like, what the heck? What happened here? And they began asking themselves, because the only people who they knew had access to Tarosuke in this way were them. The only ones who could have gotten close to him were them. But upon double checking, like, where were you at this time? Where were you? And everybody had an alibi and everybody was friends, so it couldn't have been one of them. So what the heck was going on? But amidst all of this, they also had to deal with the now new flood of emotions of seeing one of their friends, one of their brothers in arms, dead. And they began talking to themselves like, bro, that is a terrible way to go. He didn't even utter a sound. There was no fight to be had. I doubt that ever in a million years any of us, let alone he, would imagine that this would be how he went. I mean, even if it was his time to go, this is just too terrible of a way to pass on. Oh no. And then the story mentions that they all said this with a very thick Eastern Northern accent, because apparently we have to point that out, because we have to make sure that these Eastern and Northern warriors aren't put in the same category as us refined aristocrats of the capital. Okay. But of course, news of this reached Koremochi, who instantly was up in arms about it, because he began saying, "This is an insult to my good name. Anyone who would kill such a highly renowned retainer of mine clearly does not fear me and clearly wants to besmirch my good name. This was an insult to me." But though he was very angry and very sorrowful about this, he wasn't a firebrand. He wasn't prone to lashing out unreasonably. He was shrewd and he was smart. So he set his mind to thinking, and he thought to himself, this only happened because I was in an unfamiliar territory. This likely would not have happened had I continued to remain in the safety of my own abode. Furthermore, now that I think about it, it's interesting that Tarosuke was the one who was killed. And if I remember straight, he killed a man about a year or so ago. And I believe that man has a son who is currently in employment here. It must be that employee. It's gotta be him. And with that, he got up and he immediately went to the main part of the house where his father was, because he needed to talk to his father about this. And he got there, he presented himself before his father, and he said, "Dad, somebody amongst your posse has killed one of my retainers in the night. And I'm going to be honest, this is a shame to my name. And I think I know who it is. About a year ago, this retainer ended up shooting to death a man who cut him off on the road with his horse and insulted him. And that man's son is now currently serving with your servants. I am almost certain that it is him, but I want to question him. So please, if you would, good father, call him here so I can talk to him." And Papa Kanetada, he heard this with a stoic, thoughtful, pensive look on his face. And he simply told his son, he said, "You know, son, I too am almost positive that it is this kid. For you see, yesterday as we were talking, I pointed out your man to my man, and told him that that was the man that had killed his father the previous year. I also never said that I intended for him to do anything. I just told him that I felt like it would be good for him to know who his father's killer was. And it didn't sit right with me that your retainer, who ended up killing this man's father, had no idea who this man was. And as soon as I told my man this, he instantly became downcast, and he disappeared. And I didn't see him for the rest of the day. But the other servants of my house, who are constantly out and about and seeing everything that goes on, told me that they found him in the kitchen not long after that, continuously sharpening a knife. And then nobody has seen him since. So yes, it is very suspicious. But I have a question for you, son. When you say that you want me to call him and bring him here so you can question him, if you do find out that it was him, do you intend to kill him? You know, perhaps maybe I should, because that does seem like the most obvious thing for me to do. But the thing is, I may be just a humble man and not quite of your station, but I am still your father. And let's say somebody out there decided that he wanted me dead, and did the deed. And if, in this case, you became fearfully rageful and sought to seek vengeance for me, why, I certainly would not hold that against you. After all, is not vengeance for a father something that is permitted by heaven? After all, you are surely a stalwart, valiant warrior. I don't think that it would sit well with you if you were next to your father's killer and just let him get off scotch-free. And so, son, if you intend to cause harm to one of my servants who looks to me for protection and aid simply because he did his filial duty in avenging his father, well then I'm going to have to second guess my opinions of my own son and wonder if he himself would actually avenge me were the roles reversed and he had had his father slain. And old Papa Kanetada said this in a loud, stern, and powerful voice. Because this was his servant, and from Papa Kanetada's perspective, yeah, that sucks that you lost one of your warriors, but this is our value system. Avenging your own father's death, especially when he was slain for something as silly as he cut me off on the road. Well, I'm sorry, son, but that just isn't the way things are going to work around here. But the good thing is Koremochi was sensible in this regard, and he realized that after getting yelled at his dad, that his dad actually was right. And so he immediately backed off a little bit and he said, "I'm sorry, Dad, I didn't mean it, you're right." And then when he realized that he wasn't going to be able to get this Masseuse, who was now running around, who had just killed his man, he simply said, "You know what, guys, let's just go home. Like, yeah, this sucks, but what are we gonna do?" And that's exactly what they did. They went back to the province of Michinoku. And Koremochi's retainers, they took care of the body. The story doesn't say exactly how. They probably went and they cremated it, which was the custom in Japan at the time. And so, Koremochi was gone. And 3 days later, this Kozamurai, this young servant, this Masseuse, finally showed up again. But this time, he wasn't wearing normal clothes. He was wearing very dark black clothes, which are the clothes for mourning. Because now that he had avenged his father's death, he could properly mourn for his father, which is what he intended to do. And he came before Papa Kanetada, and he was exceptionally reverential and deferential and very, very thankful that he had not been handed over to Koremochi to be executed. And old Papa Kanetada was moved at the sight of this, that not only had this young man avenged his father and done what was expected of him, fulfilled his filial duty, but he was now mourning his father in all earnestness and sincerity and properly. And Papa Kanetada just couldn't help but be stirred by this. And everybody who saw this young man began weeping because they were so stirred in their hearts. And after that, this man became popular. Everybody loved him because he had demonstrated that he was a faithful, honest man and that he would do whatever he needed to do to fulfill his duties. But very, very unfortunately, it wasn't long after this that this man caught some sort of sickness and died. And old Papa Kanetada especially mourned him. And the last thing that this story says is it points out that it is very, very hard to successfully avenge one's father. Like, somebody who kills your dad usually is going to be very, very protected, very safe, or they're going to run off and hide, and actually successfully avenging your father's death is a very, very hard thing. And that is especially true when we're dealing with a man who is the spitting image of a powerful warrior, who has other retainers all around him, who's armed to the teeth, and who is protected by a very powerful man. Like, good luck, you are never going to get that done. However, this nobody Masseuse, this non-warrior, barely no longer a boy, was able to successfully avenge his father. And thus was this man praised, and thus is it said that the avenging of one's father is indeed permitted by heaven. Okay, that's the end of the actual story, and one final little bit of commentary. So, obviously, please don't go killing people who murder your dads. That we have laws for a reason, obviously. But I want to point out that, like in the previous video, with these stories, these are very early stories. Like, these come from the 900s AD, long before the samurai were really in power. But we see here in stories like this, the seeds of what would become this warrior culture that would take over the whole country and eventually come to dominate it with the rise of the shoguns and all of that. And what I love about these stories is we can see these very, very early iterations of samurai culture. And here we do see that taking revenge for the death of your father was expected and permitted. Although again, these were not codified rules, these weren't written into law. As you can see, it was kind of left up to Papa Kanetada and his son Koremochi to work out what was going to happen with this young man. So it wasn't a law per se, and had Papa Kanetada been more persuaded to his son's side of things, he very likely would have just turned him over, and then this guy would have been executed. But Papa Kanetada was like, no, this is the way things are, this is how we roll, we are warriors, and Koremochi could do nothing but agree. There was nothing he could do about it, because his dad was right, at least according to their values and their customs. So, again, it's just great that we get to see the seeds of samurai culture in some of these very, very old stories. It's awesome. Samurai are cool, but again, please don't go killing people. But again, please don't go avenging your father's deaths, okay? That we have laws for a reason. Anyway, so that's going to be it. So if you enjoyed the story, please give the video a like. If you want to stay informed when more stories are going to be coming out, please subscribe to the channel. And again, please share with your friends, because again, I would absolutely love to get to 1,000 subscribers in about the span of a month. We need just a little less than 200. We're getting there. But I would be super duper grateful. But regardless, I am so grateful for the support that has been shown up to this point. It is amazing and fantastic. And I will say one more final time, Ito kateji ke no koso haberi kere. And let's end this video because it is already way too long. See you guys later in the next one, hopefully. Bye-bye.